Hey, beautiful humans. Thank you for tuning into the Love and Life podcast, the podcast where we talk about how to live and love authentically, whatever that might look like to you. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cunningham. Let's dive in. Well, hello, lovely, amazing humans. This episode today is about expectations. And as I'm saying that, my cat chirped at me. My cat has an expectation that I am paying more attention to her whenever she wants me to pay attention to her, regardless of what I am doing. There you go. That's a great way to start this episode. And before I dive into expectations and the expectations that we have in relationships in general or in life in general or of ourselves, but specifically I'm going to be talking about expectations in polyamory and polyamorous relationships to make it relevant, but before I dive into that, I just want to share, thank you so much for listening to my podcast. And now she's playing with the cord to my headphones. This is fantastic. This is what we're doing today. Um, just want to say thank you so much for listening to my podcast, for supporting my podcast, for sharing my podcast. If this makes a difference for you and you share it with other people and that it makes a difference for them, I really appreciate you. And I appreciate your support. And I want to let you know that number one, there is a link if you scroll down, there's a link where you can give feedback. And I'm always interested. I'm always interested to hear your feedback. What did you get from the episode? Or what's a question that you have? What's a clarification that you need? What's a concern that was raised? Anything like that. Or what's a topic that you are interested in hearing me share about or talk about or teach about, etc. So there's that. Okay, fantastic. All right, let's dive into expectations. So there's several different ways that we can look at expectations. And I wrote about it in my newsletter today as well. So also, if you want to read the full article, I'm going to be making a blog series soon. So always doing stuff, Okay. Blah, 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 articles, brain things, and expectations. So you might have an expectation that I be more succinct in my communication. uh, so I look at expectations in several different ways, and I'm going to break it down. So the first thing is that unmet expectations are one of the biggest causes, if not the biggest cause of upset in relationships. So if you have an expectation, whether you were conscious of that expectation or not, and whether that expectation was communicated or not, that unmet expectation will cause an upset in the relationship. So, like a really obvious example is that if you're in a monogamous relationship, and you have the expectation that that relationship will remain monogamous for the entirety of the relationship, but then your partner comes to you and is like, hey, I think I'm polyamorous, or I think that I want to have an open relationship, or I have feelings for someone else and I want to explore that, whatever it is, whatever they said. Now you have an unmet expectation. Your expectation that this relationship was going to be monogamous is now unmet because your partner is saying that that's not something that they want to do or are going to continue to do with you in the future. So that's an example of an unmet expectation. And how do we have expectations? Like, what types of expectations do we have? So one way that we look at expectations is that there's expectations that we know that we have. like, and that we communicate to our partner. I expect you to treat me respectfully. I expect you to listen to me. I expect you to, do the things that you say that you're going to do. I expect you to follow through with the things that you say that you're going to do. So maybe some of those things are things that you've actually communicated. But then there are assumed expectations, like, well, this is my boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, wife, husband, spouse, whatever, um like lover, and so I assume that they're going to treat me with respect, and I don't have to tell them that that's an expectation of mine. I'm just going to assume that because that is common sense or common knowledge, or everyone knows that, or whatever. Or maybe you don't even think about it. Maybe it's such an assumption that it's unconscious. So that's what I'm saying, is that there's communicated expectations, there's conscious expectations that you have that you don't communicate because you think that it's common knowledge, but then there's unconscious expectations where you might just see them as truths, or that's just reality, or that's just how it is, or it's so unconscious that it doesn't even occur to you until it gets unmet. So maybe that, the monogamous example could be an example of that. If you're someone who's never heard of polyamory before and never heard of open relationships before, and then your partner comes to you and is like, I want an open relationship, that's an unconscious expectation because you didn't even know that there was an option called not monogamy, or not non-monogamy. But in this case, you wouldn't know that it's called non-monogamy. um, so where are I want to talk a little bit about how our expectations are formed, and then what you can do about that. And so we've been forming expectations for our relationships since we were little kids. We saw how our parents were. We picked up on cues. Um we asked questions. We were told things like, oh, eventually you'll get married, or eventually you'll find the person for you, or oh, like, if you were teased as like a little kid for like, ooh, that boy has a crush on you, or ooh, that girl has a crush on you, or whatever it is, from those little moments, we or like even gossip, I'll add that in there too, like listening to your parents or your family members or your friends or people in your life gossip about like how things shouldn't be. Like, oh, isn't it so disgraceful that your aunt got a divorce, or oh, like your uncle is like, such, is like not a good, I'm failing with words right now. But for lack of better words, like, your uncle, like, it's how shameful is it that your uncle like cheated on, your aunt or whatever. um and so then we're like, oh, like it's not good to lie. I mean, we already know that it's like, we generally know that it's, you know not good to lie and cheat or something like that, but we're like, oh, there are ways in which I need to behave in relationships, or other people should behave in relationships, or it's a bad thing, right? And not only are we making meaning of that, but we're also attributing emotions to it as well. Like, in high school, learning that, oh, it's like a good thing to be jealous, because if you're jealous, that means that you really care about, your partner. Or like, I remember hearing girls that I was hanging out with at high school talk about, um, like the sexual expectations that their boyfriends had of them, and their concerns around that, their fears around that, but ultimately wanting to please them because they didn't want to lose their boyfriends. They didn't want to make it a big deal. They didn't want to have any drama, etc., etc. And so, like, my expectation that I formed from that is like, oh, well, I guess I just expect guys to expect sex from me. I guess I just expect that it's hard to talk to guys about sex. I expect that they're going to be dramatic about it if we're going to talk about it. Like, all of a sudden I'm creating all of these like stories and expectations and also emotions, like I'm nervous about that, or I'm mad about that, or I'm annoyed about that, or I think that's stupid, or I wish that it were a different way, because like previously I had an expectation that being in relationships would be really fun and cool and that I could communicate with my partner. But now I'm finding out that I can't do that. And so all of these things that we go throughout our life, these cues that we pick up, we not only hear them, but we create our own stories and interpretations around them. And then we have an emotion that's tied to that then we carry that into our future relationships. And it becomes something, again, that's either we're like, this is just the way that it is, so we don't need to communicate about it. Or we, excuse me, communicate what our expectations are. But if we say something like, I expect you to be respectful, we have a way in which respectful looks to us that maybe our partner is not on the same page about. They don't feel the same way. Being a respectful partner for them maybe looks like texting every single day, where being in communication and letting you know how they feel about things, where being a respectful partner for me maybe means I expect you to I like, if you go to the grocery store, I expect you to let me know so that I can tell you if I need something. And if you don't do that, then I feel disrespected by that. But it's just like, how would they know that? But you're just, so I hope that you get the point from this. But basically we're creating these stories and expectations all the time with our emotions that are tied to them. So then we have even more charge around those expectations. So then when they're not met, then it's an even bigger deal. It's even more dramatic, right? So the first thing that we need to do, how do we, so if we have all of these expectations that we are either conscious or unconscious about, how do we recognize them as expectations? And then what do we do about that? Like, so that we can have, because I believe that people want to have healthy relationships. And even that's an expectation, right? Like, what does healthy mean, right? So, and healthy for me in this case means a relationship where there is open communication. Also, that is open for interpretation. But there's open communication and there's a safe space. That's what I mean by healthy relationships, is that, and I want to break down what I mean by safe, even because safe is also something that we assume that we know what safe means. And we have multiple different definitions for safe. So, what I mean by a healthy relationship is there's a safe space to be yourself and to communicate your wants and needs. And when I say safe, I mean that as a person, that you can bring up a subject to your partner and that they won't belittle you, they won't put you down, they won't make you feel bad, they won't make you feel guilty, they won't make you feel ashamed, they won't be mean about it to you, that when you bring them something that even if it's challenging, that they'll still be able to come from a place of understanding, of acceptance. They'll still be able to hold you in a positive regard. And so if you say something, and this is an example, real life, not my real life example, but a real life example is bringing up kinks that you have, and having the space to say, hey, this is something that I really like or that I fantasize about, and having the space with your partner be accepting and understanding, even if they don't share that kink, even if maybe they don't, like, they understand that you like it, but they don't understand, like, the kink itself, right? And so I would say that that is a space where there is safety in the relationship, because it's safe to be you. It's safe to express yourself without the fear of judgment, without the fear of pushback, without the fear of harshness of some kind. So I think that some people think of safe as just like not abusive. But that is what I mean by safe. And so in that environment, if you bring up um, a expectation, or if you bring up something that creates an unmet expectation for your partner or yourself, that then you can come to it from a space of understanding. And that doesn't and understanding does not and understanding and acceptance does not mean that you condone something. Like, if you don't agree, you don't have to agree on things to understand someone. I can understand that some people have certain political beliefs, but that doesn't mean that I agree with those political beliefs, but that means that I understand that they have those political beliefs, right? So backing up, so we're making the assumption that you're in this healthy relationship, and that you're communicating something that might be new. So again, taking the case that this is a polyamorous relationship. So maybe you're communicating, and before I was using, the transition between monogamy to polyamory and that point. But now maybe we're at the point where you're in a polyamorous relationship, you've been polyamorous for a while, and you've learned some things, because there's, in that transition from monogamy to polyamory, there are going to be so many unmet expectations. I promise you, there's going to be so many things that come up where it's just like, I didn't even know that I expected that. I didn't even know that I needed that to be communicated. I didn't even know, because it is uncharted territory, right? So let's say that you've been, polyamorous, practicing polyamory for a little while now, and you're communicating that you have met someone new, to one of your partners, and you want to be clear about the expectations that you have for making space for this new relationship, for the feelings that the other person has in this relationship, uh, uh, the person who you've been dating, making space for their feelings, making space for your feelings, making space for the new person's feelings. And what are the expectations that you have? And then knowing that some of those expectations are not always going to be um, known or be able to be fully communicated, that you're going to discover new expectations as you go, right? And so when we uncover, so bringing it all the way back to how expectations are created, they might be created from stories, they might be created from just observation. But again, there is that emotional charge usually to an expectation. And so when we are aware that we have expectations, and when we start to uncover what our expectations are, and starting with words like, what do you mean by partner? What do you mean by polyamory? What do you mean by respect? What do you mean by acceptance? What do you like? Those, that's a great place to start when trying to figure out like what expectations you have or don't have. So bringing it all the way back to that, and then recognizing that you do have an emotional charge around those things. And I want you to consider that when you, because I feel like I have this conversation with some people and they're like, I don't have an emotional charge around that. And I'm like, okay, right now in this moment, you don't have an emotional charge around it because we are talking about it in a, in more of an abstract way. But I want you to put yourself in a situation where that expectation would be broken, and just see for yourself, like, what are the emotions that come up for you. And also, I want you to consider that if that situation happened, that you would feel an emotion about it, even if you don't feel an emotion about it right now at this very moment, because we're talking about it conceptually. Okay, like, you do have emotions. All right. You do have emotions. You do have emotional reactions. Humans are emotional creatures. We like to talk about things logically, but we are very emotional creatures. And so that's why having these talks about expectations and unmet expectations is so important, because I promise you, when there's an unmet expectation, you are going to have an emotional reaction about it. And so if you're aware that that's what's going to happen, that is going to help you just recognize, like, oh, there was an unmet expectation here. I'm having an emotional reaction about that. Elizabeth said that that would happen. Maybe I can just take a step back and just recognize that that's the reaction that I'm having right now. And that's okay, but I don't need to make a decision from this reaction. I don't need to, unleash on my partner because of this reaction. I don't need to have an outburst because of this reaction. I just need to notice that I'm having this reaction because there was an unmet expectation. And then from that awareness, being able to communicate, have a conversation, say what you need, etc. Okay. All right. How many times can I say expectation in 22 minutes? All right, loves. Does that make sense? What are you getting? What are you getting from this episode? What are you gleaning from this episode? What are some expectations that you have in your relationships, in polyamory, in monogamy, in being queer, in whatever it is? What are some expectations that what are some expectations? There's a lot of gender expectations. Oh my God, we didn't even talk about that. Like, the expectations that people have of you as a man, as a woman, as a trans person, as a non-binary person. Like, that is a whole world to unpack as well. And that absolutely impacts your relationships, especially if you're in a relationship with someone who's in a relationship that's more hetero presenting, because those gender norms don't get challenged as much, and so those expectations can stay there. Oh my God, don't even get me started. Okay, I'm concluding now. Apparently I need to make an expectations really podcast episode about gender. All right, I love you all. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Again, I would love to hear your feedback. If you would pretty please, if you would like to leave a review of this podcast, if you would like to rate this podcast, that really helps me out as well. And so I appreciate you. Thank you. Love you. Thank you so much for joining me today. What are your takeaways? What is an action that you're going to take that will have this make a difference in your life? However small, take that action. Don't let this just be a good idea. make that 1% shift in your life today to live more freely and authentically. If you'd like to learn more about my coaching, my classes, or the events that I host, check out my website at www.elizabethannecunningham.com. Until next time, keep loving.